All right, welcome in. Well, first thing I have to tell people is get off of the emotion express. That's what we saw today surrounding Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers because Amon-Ra St. Brown, the good receiver for the Detroit Lions, agreed to a contract extension in the morning. And very predictably, and I don't know why people keep on making this same mistake over and over and over again, very predictably, people took the initial report, which is based on information from the player and his agent, and they took that initial report to think that Amon-Ra St. Brown signed some kind of record-breaking contract that is completely going to screw up the 49ers negotiations with Brandon Aiyuk. Well, zero surprise. We got the full details later on today. And these people who so breathlessly rushed to the internet to make their takes were completely wrong. Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract might be worth $30 million per year on the surface, but it actually ranks number 11 out of all receivers in fully guaranteed money. So I'm going to spend this show explaining why we need to pay attention to fully guaranteed money, not total guaranteed money, and definitely not average per year. But the big gist of things is that this was a Brandon Aiyuk overreaction. People thought that when Amon-Ra St. Brown signed a deal that was initially reported to be worth $30 million per year, people thought that the 49ers would be completely priced out of the Brandon Aiyuk market. But if you actually understand how contracts work, you know that in the case of the top two receivers, as far as APY right now, Tyreek Hill and Amon-Ra St. Brown, there is a ton of fluff. And I'll explain how all that fluff works in a series of two rules. Rule one is that APY, average per year, is largely irrelevant in these contract discussions. We're going to take a look at Tyreek Hill's contract to begin. This is with Miami right now. He's the other receiver who's at $30 million per year. It's him and Amon-Ra St. Brown. The only way that Tyreek Hill has gotten to $30 million per year is because here in 2026, you'll see it at the bottom left of your screen, they've given him a $43.9 million base salary that is not guaranteed. So this is just a sell on a spreadsheet. None of this money is guaranteed. Tyreek Hill is almost certainly not going to make that base salary in 2026. But what it does, it's funny money that bumps up his average to $30 million per year. Well, guess what? Amon-Ra St. Brown, with his contract, they've done the same exact thing, except a little bit less because some of the money was distributed differently elsewhere. $35.4 million, none of it is guaranteed in that final season. That is a very specific amount just to get it up to the total of $30 million per year. So APY is largely irrelevant. That is rule number one. Rule number two to remember is that fully guaranteed money is what matters. Fully guaranteed money is ultimately what is going to drive any of these negotiations. So when I wrote my piece that was looking at what Brandon Aiyuk's contract might look like, I have the top receivers in terms of APY in the league, but I sorted it by fully guaranteed money. And we have so much misinformation out there right now, it just makes my stomach churn. But the top receiver in terms of fully guaranteed money, even though his APY was a little bit inflated, or a lot inflated, as I just showed you, is Tyreek Hill at $52.5 million of fully guaranteed money. When this Amon-Ra St. Brown news first came out, people were breathlessly repeating the initial report saying, oh my God, he's got $77 million guaranteed, because that's what the initial tweet said, right? And as you can see here, $77 million fully guaranteed would be like $15 million more than Tyreek Hill. It would have completely broken the market. I mean, people, we need to be smart enough to realize that when these numbers come out and people are saying that this is breaking the market and you compare it, it doesn't make sense. We need to be smarter, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown is not going to get $77 million fully guaranteed when Tyreek Hill only got $52.5 million and is the high water mark. So it's obvious that that's total guaranteed money, not fully guaranteed money. And that is what we need to make sure that we delineate between. Total guarantees include the money in case a player suffered a career-ending injury, what you would owe him. Fully guaranteed money is what you owe him no matter what, otherwise known as guaranteed at signing. It's harder to get fully guaranteed money than totally guaranteed money. And people are mixing up the two. So Amon-Ra St. Brown has only 35.2 million or so of fully guaranteed money. And as you can see here in the list of the top receiver contracts, I didn't have Amon-Ra St. Brown's on here because I wrote this a lot earlier than when this contract was done. This is from about a month ago. But in the ranking of the top contracts, 35.2 million fully guaranteed would rank number 11. It'd be just above Cooper Kupp's total. And Cooper Kupp doesn't really have an inflated APY. He earned his 26 million per year. So this deal for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would say probably, if you had to look at the fair APY, not the fluff APY, I'd have to do the calculations myself when I look at the contract. But I would say it's somewhere closer to 25, 26 million per year, which, if we go to my article here, what Brandon Aiyuk's contract might look like with the 49ers, I talk about 25.8 or 25.9 million per year, 26 million per year of real money, though. What matters with Brandon Aiyuk is the fully guaranteed money. And I do think that it's absolutely possible that he hits around 50 million fully guaranteed. In fact, my contract for Brandon Aiyuk, the one that I proposed in this article, we talked about the possibility of 50 plus million fully guaranteed, somewhere around what Tyreek Hill is at 52.5 million. I think Aiyuk is that good and that durable. Yes, all these things can be true. I also think the 49ers can potentially pay that because they are a cash-rich team. And what cash-rich teams can do in the case of these contracts is they can spread the cap hit out over up to 5 seasons. And there are tools to be able to spread it out even longer because you can have a guaranteed option bonus kick in the next year in 2025, and it spreads out through a void year in 2029. Now, this is just a proposed contract from me, but I gave Brandon Aiyuk $50 million of bonus money between the signing bonus and the option bonus. I spread it out like an accordion. I guaranteed some minimum base salaries at the start, and I came up with a contract where they can actually lower his cap hit in the 2024 season by about $6 million. Now, for the 49ers to do this, they would have to be willing to spend a lot of money. So far, over the course of this regime, they have been willing to spend the type of signing and option bonus money, which is coming straight out of Jed York's pocket right now. They have been willing to spend that kind of money so they can work around the salary cap, so they can push these cap hits into the future. The question is, are they willing to spend this kind of money right now, again, for Brandon Aiyuk? Because I talk about the salary cap and I talk about each year's financial situation within the context and with the comparison of a sink or multiple sinks. Every single season is a sink. Water that pours into the sink are your expenditures, how much you're paying for players. The drain at the bottom of the sink is how much money you're cutting from the budget every year, either through expiring contracts, cutting players, trading players, what have you. Each sink is connected to the next season's salary cap sink because unused space will carry over from season to season. Also, if you do restructure a player's contract or if you do give a player a nice big signing bonus that spreads over 5 years, a lot of that water that would have poured into this 2024 sink instead pours partly into the 2025 sink, partly into the 2026 sink, partly into 2027, partly into 2028. So you're, as a manager of a salary cap on an NFL team, you're constantly managing the levels of water in each sink, and you're letting a little bit of water out the drain in 2024, and you're having it hit in 2025 to 2028 instead. Sometimes you could even add more water now, so a little bit less comes later. And in the 49ers case, you're thinking about the big pour, and the big pour out of the faucet is going to be the Brock Purdy contract, which presumably is going to be agreed to next year in 2025. So as you're managing the water levels in each sink, you need to make sure that you're leaving enough room for the big cascade of water that's going to come with the Brock Purdy contract. And that ties so directly into everything that we talk about with Brandon Aiyuk. Because A, you're not exactly sure how big the salary cap is going to be in future years. It's tied to NFL revenues. So a lot of this is guesswork. Whenever the sink overflows, if you've lost your ability to drain through restructures and push water forward, that sink overflows, you get to a point where you actually have to cut players. You actually have to make very, very difficult decisions. So we saw the 49ers this offseason. They don't want to reach that point. So they looked at all their contracts and they said, okay, which ones are efficient and which aren't? Eric Armstead, well, he's missed 13 games over the past 2 years. Ooh, this number is way too high. He's got non-guaranteed money, but his number's way too high, way too much water pouring into the sink for Eric Armstead's contract. So we got to get him to either take a pay cut or we'll cut him if he doesn't accept the pay cut. Boom. They cut Eric Armstead. He didn't accept the pay cut. He would have worked with, I think, a pay cut that was less severe than the one the 49ers proposed. But San Francisco found it more efficient to trade for somebody like Malik Collins than to go that route with Eric Armstead. Okay, that makes sense. You talk about other financial efficiencies, inefficiencies. Well, that's where they have to assign their number for Brandon Aiyuk. And the Brandon Aiyuk situation is one where the 49ers have to value him at a certain amount. And Aiyuk is going to value himself at a certain amount. And then if this is going to work, they're both going to have to come onto the same page and find an agreement. That's how it worked with George Kittle. That's how it worked with Fred Warner. That's how it worked with Deebo Samuel. That's how it worked with Nick Bosa. One interesting point of this whole negotiation, something that's said by John Lynch that he hadn't said in years prior, is that the 49ers do have motivation to get this done sooner rather than later this time. I don't think that they were happy with the fact that both Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa's deals took so long that really pushed the after effects into the regular season for both of those guys, especially with Nick Bosa. I mean, his deal wasn't signed until right before the 49ers played the Steelers. So I think that the 49ers, they've set deadlines of training camp and the regular season in the past for these players. It could very well be that the deadline is sooner this year. And the only logical inflection point for a deadline that's sooner than the start of training camp, because nothing happens in between now and training camp, is the NFL draft. But if this is truly a deadline, and if Aiyuk does not come in any closer with concessions to the 49ers side, and the 49ers aren't coming any closer to him, if this is truly a deadline, then they'll trade him, right? If they want to enforce this deadline. They don't. This could just be another faux deadline, like the ones with Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa. They said from the very start that they weren't trading him, so there was no chance of him being dealt before the draft. But right now, this is an inflection point. But the inflection point doesn't have teeth if the 49ers are just going to be sitting there and completely resolutely be committed to Brandon Aiyuk. So the reports that the 49ers can be moved off their position of wanting to keep him forever if they get offered enough, those make complete sense. Every man has his price. Every man probably should have his price. I think it might have been one of the 49ers' mistakes in the Nick Bosa negotiation last year to come out and say very early on that, oh yeah, there's no way we're trading him. He's with us for sure. That gave Nick Bosa free reign to grab as much money as he possibly could from the 49ers. And even though San Francisco tried to play hardball for a really long time through an entire training camp and preseason holdout, they ended up giving Nick Bosa $34 million per year and $88 million fully guaranteed. $88 million fully guaranteed. We talk about, look, I mean, go back to this. This is funny to me. To give you an idea of how big the Nick Bosa deal was, we talk about Brandon Aiyuk. Oh, will he reach $50 million fully guaranteed? Because that's where Tyreek Hill is at to top the receiver market. Nick Bosa got $88 million fully guaranteed. 88, 34 per year, 88 fully guaranteed. So the 49ers lost all leverage last year when they told Nick Bosa and they told the world that they weren't going to trade him, that he was totally off limits. They never said that Deebo Samuel was totally off limits. They never said that Kittle was totally off limits. Warner's negotiations were much more quiet, but they never said that either. And they've never said that Brandon Aiyuk is totally off limits. They have simply come out and said, we would like Brandon Aiyuk to be with us. It's very unlikely that he gets traded. We wouldn't anticipate that if you listen to John Lynch's words. But I think that the subtext and the reality here is that it's also very unlikely that people are, and the reason that's unlikely is because it's also very unlikely that people would be willing to offer the 49ers enough to justify their move off of Brandon Aiyuk. Yesterday I said, simplify the Brandon Aiyuk situation to a value calculation. The value calculation of the 49ers has to take into account that they've got an excellent roster now, that they're trying to win a Super Bowl this next year. They're trying to take it the next step. They're trying to kick the door down and actually win the thing this time. So they don't want to get worse. They want to get better in the short run. That's all a major, major part of the Brandon Aiyuk value calculation, because if you trade him, you better get enough in return to at least give yourself a chance to get better in 2024, which probably means high first round draft pick. And then, even if you do give yourself a chance to be better in 2024, it's not a guarantee. So trading Brandon Aiyuk would mark a major risk for the 49ers for what would be technically some financial relief, yes, because obviously you wouldn't have to pay him his long-term extension, but at what cost, right? You'd get financial relief for the cost of, I wouldn't say very likely, but very possibly being worse in 2024. Now, there are scenarios that you can talk about where the 49ers do get better. They're without Brandon Aiyuk. There's their pass protection was the statistical weakness of this team, the most glaring deficiency last year. So say that in an imaginary scenario, you do get a top half first round draft pick like they got for DeForest Buckner in 2020. And you use it on somebody in this draft, one of the tackles that ends up being as good as Tristan Wirfs, who the 49ers could have drafted in 2020, but instead they drafted Javon Kinlaw. Say that happens. Theoretically, the 49ers offensive line could be immediately better. They could replace Aiyuk with, a smaller name. Your receivers take a step back, but the improvement that you make along the offensive line outweighs that. You could theoretically be better at a lower cost, salary cap wise, in 2024. But that's a lot of ifs. That's a lot of conditions. You know what's a sure thing? Brandon Aiyuk being a good football player. You've developed him over the course of the years. And you talk about Brock Purdy and the major investment that you're going to make in him next year. Well, I mean, he has built rapport with Brock Purdy over the seasons that I don't think should be underestimated. I brought up this chart for Brandon Aiyuk so many times, and I don't think that we can downplay it. I think I got to show it every single time I talk about his value to the team. And there's a reason he's in the upper right. And you talk about somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's right here. He's also in the upper right. But he's part of a cluster. Brandon Aiyuk is an outlier. So it'd be very, very difficult for the 49ers to get better next season without a receiver as damn good as Brandon Aiyuk was for them in 2023. And let's be honest, he was really good in 2022 as well. Really an all-around wide receiver. People say Amon-Ra St. Brown had, 44 more catches than Brandon Aiyuk this past year? It's because the volume is different. He's used very differently in terms of the Lions offense than Aiyuk is with the 49ers offense. But efficiency and not volume rule the day when it comes to correlation to winning in the NFL. Just because Brandon Aiyuk is not getting as many passes thrown in his direction does not mean that he's playing fewer snaps, and it definitely does not mean that he's having less of an impact than somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown. Aiyuk led the league in yards per catch at 17.9 last season, and on plays where he's not getting the ball, he has created a major diversion that allows other guys to get open, and he's also blocked his ass off. That's really important within the context of how the 49ers operate. This is not a volume-based pass attack. This is an efficiency-based pass attack. And if I could tell you what's way more connected to winning than volume, it's efficiency. And Brandon Aiyuk, the 49ers, they're interested in paying him based on his efficiency, but they also must fit that within the larger scope of their budget, which obviously includes Brock Purdy next season. So 2 rules. APY is largely irrelevant. Fully guaranteed money is what matters. That Amon-Ra St. Brown deal today, only $35 million of it came via fully guaranteed money. People absolutely lost their minds this morning. Completely lost their minds this morning when they saw that this contract was worth $30 million per year. Well, they broke rule number 1. They considered APY, average per year, to be relevant. Well, if deals like this are Tyreek Hill's and you've got $35.4 million non-guaranteed in 2028, that's artificially raising the APY, then it is irrelevant. So people should have waited. They should have gotten off the emotion express. They should have focused more on business 101, but I'll digress. Rule number 2, fully guaranteed money is what matters. And this St. Brown deal, $35 million of fully guaranteed money. We can always resort to this chart right here to see where the fully guaranteed money scale lies. So where do you think Brandon Aiyuk ends up? Do you think he ends up at $50 million fully guaranteed? Do you think he ends up traded? Is there a team out there that's willing to make it worth the 49ers while to trade him and also give him $50 million fully guaranteed money or $45 million in fully guaranteed money? I don't know where exactly the number is going to end up for Brandon Aiyuk, but I do know that he's really damn good. And the arguments that he doesn't have as many targets as somebody like Amon-Ra St. Brown are wholly unconvincing. I mean, just put on the tape for Aiyuk. He's excellent. The 49ers want him on their football team. Now the question is, can they fit him on the football team? With the main point, and this is the one I was waiting to hammer home, being this one. The 49ers absolutely control the proceedings in this situation. This is what people need to remember. Even the people that were breathlessly saying that Amon-Ra St. Brown, even if they were correct, let's throw people a bone here. So many accounts, and they know who they are, this morning went on and say, oh boy, the 49ers waited too long. Look at this deal. This is a record-setting deal for Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is going to open up the bank for Brandon Aiyuk. The 49ers probably won't be able to pay it. They shouldn't have waited. All this, even if that were all true, the 49ers would have still held firm control over the Brandon Aiyuk proceedings and controlled the destiny of what was going to happen, whether it be a trade or a signing, because he's still under contract with them. A lot of people don't understand that Brandon Aiyuk is not a free agent. It's not like he's on the open market waiting to sign the best deal coming to him. He is under contract for the 2024 season at $14.2 million, which is the fifth-year option price. And then theoretically, the 49ers can exert contractual control for 2 seasons beyond that. That is 2025 and 2026 with what we call the franchise tag. All told, and I wrote about this in the big piece where I do look at the potential Brandon Aiyuk contract, which is right here. All told, that would add up to about, I think I came up with $22 million per year over 3 years. If the 49ers just said, fine, this guy's not willing to meet us anywhere near our terms, we can't find common ground. The 49ers, if they want to play true hardball, and they really want Aiyuk on their team, they can keep him for up to these 3 years with the fifth-year option as is, and then 2 franchise tags. They can keep him at a relatively bargain rate. Now, I'm not saying that any side of this wants that. The 49ers might even prefer trading Aiyuk away to doing that. But that is a negotiation anchor, right? You have extremes. You have 2 extremes in any contract negotiation. You have what the player wants over here. You have what the team wants over here, right? And you're trying to find middle ground. What the player wants, which is this hand right here, what the player wants is going to be limited by the fact that the team has the situation under contract with the fifth-year option, and they have the threat of 2 franchise tag years in their back pocket. With the 49ers, if Brandon Aiyuk's demands get too ridiculous, if these 2 hands are getting too far apart, then the 49ers can just revert to full team control with the 5th-year option and the franchise tags, and it would just they're keeping the hands a lot closer together with that. And that's about $22 million per year over 3 million over 3 years. Now, Aiyuk can also call the 49ers bluff in this situation. I don't know if that would be effective. He could softly call their bluff by being like, well, you don't want to be giving me a $14 million cap hit this year. You'd rather lower my cap hit. You'd rather keep my cap hit low for the 2025 season. You want more control over the contract, because if you gave Aiyuk the 5th-year option and 2 franchise tags and made him play on that, you couldn't spread out the cap hit like the 49ers have done here. You couldn't be able to use the accordion signing bonus, option bonus structure to fit Brock Purdy onto the books. So that's one reason that the 49ers would rather get a long-term deal done now. Brandon Aiyuk obviously would want a long-term deal because he wants to play for more money than just the 5th-year option and the 2 franchise tags. So the logical middle ground in these negotiations is to find a long-term deal with quite a bit of fully guaranteed money that can stretch out the damage over the course of multiple seasons. So at that point, you start to say, okay, what's Aiyuk's number? What does he want in terms of that fully guaranteed money? What is the 49ers number? Some of this may also come down to, does Brandon Aiyuk want to hit the market sooner again? Remember, Deebo Samuel signed only a 3-year deal on top of the existing year that he had. Does Ayuk only want a 3-year deal? The 49ers naturally, I think, would want 5 extra years just because you get more team control. And the money in the final 2 seasons of those deals is almost never fully guaranteed or guaranteed at all. So the 49ers would have team control at their own discretion at that point. So maybe there are sticking points and differences about the contract term length. There obviously are differences about the amount of guaranteed money, but that's where you have to try to find that middle ground. And that's where it's taken some time for the 49ers to find the middle ground. And that's why they want to find the middle ground quicker this year, because the fact that it's taken time over the course of the Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa contracts has actually adversely affected both those players and the 49ers team. So that's where we stand right now. I hope that this makes sense. The overreaction today was absolutely insane. Obviously, everything is on the table for the 49ers, but the track record does speak for itself. And so does the track record of reporting and reactions to these deals. You don't just go and see a contract without the details, without the structure, and say that it's going to impact a multi-million-dollar negotiation somewhere else. I mean, it's ludicrous. The jumps in logic that people are making just so they can get clicks, just so they can get instantaneous reactions. I mean, they're preying on your emotions, right? There's no reason to get emotional about Brandon Aiyuk stuff in the morning as it relates to Amon-Ra St. Brown until you actually know the Amon-Ra St. Brown details. I'm going to open this up to some questions here. Is a 49ers Q&A. That was the only thing that really crossed the desk today. We'll see if any other news hits. By the way, we are 24 hours away from the NFL draft. I'm looking through some questions now. Patrick Wayne, every man has a price. Hashtag pay BA. I love when people use my own quotes. That's fun. See what Mike says. Of course, Mike says, post your questions. He's correct. Oh, boy. So I've got an article previewing the 49ers draft strategy. It's going to be coming out tomorrow morning. Today, while I wait for some of these questions, we have the big board. Here you go. Put this up on the screen. Draft starts tomorrow. I've got a big 49ers. I could even play that here. I probably will do that. I'll probably debut the big draft preview show where I stitch together some of my old videos on this live, and then we'll post that independently later. But I went through all 49ers top 30 visits that we know of, 23 of them, talked about all of those players. This is our biggest correlation historically to who the 49ers actually draft. We can talk about trade up, trade down possibilities. That's obviously something that we should talk about, but we do need to know that the 49ers have armed themselves with maximum optionality entering this draft. And some of that optionality does include a big-time maneuver of Brandon Aiyuk. It might not be likely, but all hands are on deck. 49ers need to build the most efficient roster possible. And they also have to take into account not just long-term considerations, but short-term considerations, which is what's at the top of my mind when I talk about them and Brandon Aiyuk for this next season. How much money clears in June? About 18 million. Whatever Eric Armstead had on the books this season clears on June 2nd. You like my Zach Zinter draft pick? Nice. Yeah, I got the mock draft out there. This is our big board, 55 options for the 49ers. Matt Barrows and I co-wrote this. You can always click on my page on The Athletic where you'll see a whole lot more. We've got the big mock draft with all the beat writers in The Athletic where we pick the player. And then obviously Matt and I have our 7-round mock draft, which we do together. Darius Robertson, Johnny Newton out of Illinois in that picture. And you can go to the Brock Purdy, Fred Warner content as well. The 49ers have the money to pay Brandon Aiyuk. The question is, do they want to allot that money to Brandon Aiyuk? It's the whole sink theory that I was talking about earlier, because this is a salary capped league. There is a cap. It's a hard cap. You've got to be under the cap. Now, you can maneuver to find your way under it, but not forever, because the sink will overflow if you pour too much water in it. So they have to decide between what they're planning to pay Purdy, what they have on the books next year. They have to decide how much they can reserve for Brandon Aiyuk. Then they have to decide how important it is for them to keep him on this roster. I think it's very important. That's just my personal opinion. And I've showed you data to support that opinion. So they weigh those different things, and they're going to see how much they can give Brandon Aiyuk. And that's probably created the framework for what they've offered. Aiyuk has every right to ask for more. And then this situation has every right to draw out, because the 49ers need to be financially responsible. Brandon Aiyuk obviously has the right to sit there and try to get as much money as he possibly can. And we will see an inflection point in the draft, and we'll move forward. They have the money. The question is where they're going to allot it. And the question is, if they do a lot of it to Brandon Aiyuk, even if it's creatively structured, can they be in a position to pay everybody else and keep the team reasonably efficient moving forward? There are so many different angles of this to consider. It is never as simple as pay this guy. Do we have enough money to do it? No, I mean, you have to think about the downstream effects and the other players on the roster that need to fit under the salary cap. All right, we're going to go to our ultimate draft preview now. It is time for that. I'm going to open this up. It's going to be a good 20 minutes of stuff. So enjoy the 49ers ultimate draft preview. Our ultimate 49ers draft preview from the spot where Brock Purdy filmed his John Deere commercial and saved a woman from a coyote. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But through the entire top 30 list, that is the plan for this. And we'll bounce around different spots of the city. So typically the best way to get an idea of who the 49ers might draft is to keep a close eye on their top 30 visit list. And so far, we've accounted for 22 of these 30 visits. 3 of them have been offensive linemen. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to go through this position by position today to get a really good gauge on who the 49ers have brought to the team facility. Those 3 offensive linemen are Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU, 2nd round grade, Caden Wallace out of Penn State, he is a 4th round grade, and Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame, another 2nd round grade. You might notice a commonality there. No 1st round graded offensive linemen amongst the top 30 that we know. They could have done some surreptitious visits in those final 8 spots that we haven't accounted for, of higher ranked guys like Troy Fautanu, who I've mocked to the 49ers and who I've talked about. But the 49ers aren't picking until number 31. And if their strategy is going to be to sit back and make sure that they can keep as many picks as possible, maybe even trade down a little bit, makes sense they would look in the 2nd to the 4th rounds. They've also looked at Roger Rosengarten out of Washington. Roger Rosengarten is a player who the 49ers decided to work out up in Seattle. All of these linemen are athletic. I think Rosengarten's the most athletic. Rosengarten might be the fastest lineman in the past several years as far as his 40 time goes. He's a really impressive player as far as movement ability goes. Kingsley Suamataia out of BYU, beefier than Roger Rosengarten. I think some polish might be needed at the NFL level, but the physical upside, he's so strong, is very, very enticing. Blake Fisher started 2 years at left tackle at Notre Dame. You know, the 49ers have drafted a Notre Dame tackle before in Mike McGlinchey. And if you want experience, Caden Wallace might be your guy out of Penn State. 4 years starting at Penn State at that right tackle position. I think anybody the 49ers draft, they're going to want side versatility. So somebody like Roger Rosengarten to me is really exciting because he played left tackle in high school, obviously traded with Joe Staley, and it wasn't a top 30 visit, but they flew out to Seattle, and they flew Chris Foerster out there too, so I'm including him in this discussion. But he played left tackle under Ed McCaffrey in high school, at CMC's high school, and then he moved the right tackle in Washington to protect the lefty quarterback, Michael Penix Jr.'s blind side, so he's got side versatility. They would think that Blake Fisher does. He played that left tackle spot for 2 years with Notre Dame, but Trent Williams is still
on the football team, so you're not going to see immediate action at left tackle. I think the 49ers would probably look for somebody to push Colton McKivitz and be a swing tackle, so that would definitely require versatility. So you look at all the players they brought in, I think the potential positional adaptability, athleticism, those are all commonalities there. But the main thing to consider is that none of these guys are high first round grades. The 49ers are looking for developmental prospects, guys that can immediately be swing tackles and maybe even take over for Colton McKivitz at some point in 2024. But they just don't have the draft pick right now to be looking at the higher shelf guys. And at offensive tackle, that is a little bit of a hurdle that you have to get over. I mean, the surefire guys, or the close to surefire guys, are going to be found higher up in the first round than where the 49ers have a pick. So that's why you have to use your higher floor that you extended by re-signing Colton McKivitz to probably pick somebody a little bit lower and then hope that he grows into the role. So it's a longer term plan at offensive line. Tight end, only one of them documented in the top 30, and it's Eric All. First he was at Michigan, then he transferred to Iowa. He's actually coming off of a torn ACL, so he didn't run a 40. And we know that fast 40 times are correlated with big time tight end production. 49ers were beneficiaries of this with George Kittle, ran a 4.5 40, but George Kittle's an alien. Can't expect anybody else at this position to run a 4.5 40, but Eric Gall looked fast on tape at both Michigan and Iowa, where he was on pace for a career year before he tore his ACL this past year. He has a 5th round tag on him right now. That's what people are expecting. That's where George Kittle went. Obviously, the 49ers got value from George Kittle, an Iowa tight end, like All, but he wasn't coming off of a torn ACL. So if the 49ers believe that Eric All can return to full speed, and the younger you have injuries like this, the better, because your body has a better chance to bounce back. They think he can come back to full speed. They might have somebody that can complement George Kittle out there on the field, because I think All has good hands. I think that he's developing as a blocker, but he played at Iowa. He practiced last year at Iowa before he got hurt. That'll help you as a blocker. It's all about finding a number 2 to Kittle, the Robin, the Batman, because the 49ers have struggled. They haven't been able to find that over the years. Charlie Warner only had 11 catches over 4 seasons with them. They tried to get Brock Wright, the RFA, but Detroit matched their offer. So now Eric Gall is the one player that they've worked out of the position. We'll see if he can overcome that torn ACL, and if the 49ers might think about drafting him. We're going to talk about some safeties. The 49ers have hosted 3 of them on their known top 30 list so far. This is a position of need. They're a body short right now. We've talked a lot about veterans and Justin Simmons, and he's still available, by the way, this offseason. But I think for the long-term replenishment effort, if you want to infuse this roster with youth, you got to look at some of these prospects. And Sione Vaki is one of my favorite prospects. He's one of those 30 visits out of Utah, played running back as well. But instinctive player. Reminds some people of Talanoa Hufanga. Doesn't have the greatest metrics, 4.6 40, but I think plays fast because of a good first step. And he knows the game. He's a football player. The fact that he plays both ways, running back as well, tells you something. Then you've got Kalen Bullock out of USC. He's visited the 49ers. More prototypical speed, 75th percentile 40, good 10-yard split, 6'2", nice size for the safety position. You have to like him. Javon Bullard, meanwhile, who's also visited the 49ers out of Georgia. He played the star position for Kirby Smart at Georgia, and that's a versatile DB position that Brandon Staley, new 49ers defensive mastermind, has employed in the past. So Javon Bullard is a lightning bolt. Look out for him at 5'10" to be a versatile DB for the 49ers. I think that he absolutely can fit this new defensive vision, at least on the back end, that they might have with Brandon Staley, because the star position, something that goes back all the way to the Bill Belichick Cleveland days. And the idea was passed down from Belichick to Saban to Kirby Smart, and Javon Bullard played it at Georgia. He was the defensive player of the game in a national title game. This guy can play. He may not have the best metrics, not the biggest guy, but I think he could be a versatile DB that can move between nickel and safety. So Bullard, Kalen Bullock, and Sione Vaki, the 3 safeties the 49ers have hosted. All 3 of them, you could see where the vision would be, where they would fit on this San Francisco roster. Don't be surprised that the 49ers use another valuable draft pick on a defensive lineman. They've hosted 5 of these guys on their top 30 visits. I'm going to run you through the possibilities based on this intel. The only top 30 visit so far that's been documented that we know about that's involved a first round graded prospect has been on a defensive lineman. It's on Marshawn Kneeland out of Western Michigan. This is a player that's expected to go later in the first round, maybe early in the second. It's going to be really interesting to see if the 49ers decide to pull the trigger on the defensive side of the football. No, a lot of people are saying no, that this can't possibly be the time because they did invest so much in that defensive line over free agency. I tend to agree. I think that the 49ers will lean offense because they have drafted by need in the past, but I have to talk about Marshawn Kneeland because he has visited the 49ers, 6'3", about 270 pounds, has the size of the big end that the 49ers have coveted recently. But I would be cautious just because I don't think that the college production was that great for Marshawn Kneeland, and he was at a smaller school at Western Michigan. Players with more upside, I think, especially relative to their draft position, you could find them on the 49ers visit list a little bit later on. Brandon Dorless, tackle out of Oregon. This is a guy who ran nearly 21 miles per hour on the GPS tracker. One of the fastest defensive tackle prospects that we've seen in quite some time. I think he could be an inside-out guy for the 49ers as well. And that's really what they look for, right? Somebody who could slide inside, take advantage of guards on those passing downs. Then there's a nose tackle prospect. It's a really, really big player. I'm talking true size. Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic. Evan Anderson was 360 pounds when he entered college. He has since slimmed down about 320 pounds, but still a fire hydrant type. And this is somebody that's projected to be an undrafted free agent. So if the 49ers are looking for a big-time run clogger in the middle of the formation, Evan Anderson may be a player that they take a look at. Mike Hall, now you're moving to smaller yet quicker defensive tackle talent. Mike Hall went to Ohio State. You should check out his tape against Michigan. I thought he was extremely quick off the ball against the Michigan Wolverines. I mean, this is a guy who he's not going to get beat with athleticism. He might get a little washed out because of size, but the way that the league is moving now, Aaron Donald is somebody who I think made this a trend based on how well he performed, just with how athletic he was, even though he was so much lighter than the standard defensive tackle. You really want that twitch up front, and I will say that Mike Hall out of Ohio State has that, and the 49ers could do worse than adding another player, another defensive lineman from Ohio State. Obviously, the one that's on their team right now has performed really well. We talk about quickness and athleticism and strength and just potential. The 49ers might get real value if they are able to draft a player that they brought in that has insane numbers, and that's Chris Braswell out of Alabama. Braswell's hit 21.9 miles per hour on the GPS, and he has squatted 705 pounds. Also had over 10 sacks last year, so production in the SEC. They're putting second or third round on Chris Braswell. Defensive end, about 251 pounds. Remember the 49ers drafted Robert Beal Jr. last year for his ability to get off the ball and move. Well, Chris Braswell, again, at 22 miles an hour and 705 pounds on the squat rack. I think Chris Kocurek would be really, really excited with that potential right there. Look out for that, because the 49ers, 5 of these 30 visits at least have got a defensive lineman. I think they're definitely going to try to give Chris Kocurek some more material to work with.
Trevin Wallace and Tatum Bethune are the two linebackers that we know of on the 49ers 30 visit list. Trevin Wallace, he's projected to go in the third round. This would be a bigger swing for the 49ers at a position where they did draft two linebackers last year. They did draft D. Winters out of TCU and Jalen Graham out of Purdue. And Trevin Wallace is really fast. I know that the 49ers love that, 4.5 40, but there's been talk of some over-aggressiveness. It doesn't seem like he's quite played into his athleticism yet. So this would be a project, a developmental linebacker, and I'm not really sure if the 49ers would be willing to use a third round pick, something a little bit more valuable on that, especially since they have stocked that room recently. That being said, the Dre Greenlaw injury does make you think about a bigger investment at the position. Other linebacker on the top 30 list is Tatum Bethune out of Florida State. This is a guy who's slower, But I think that somebody who hits hard and somebody who might be a more natural player at the position. So not the same athleticism metrics as Trevin Wallace, but somebody who might be able to immediately contribute on special teams just because of his ability to play the game. Those are just the two linebackers that the 49ers have looked at in documented fashion. There still might be other players on their list, and linebacker is a position where the 49ers could add. In fact, anything is a position where the 49ers could add.
So this is the famous spot in San Francisco where Brock Purdy saved a Bay Area news anchor from a coyote while filming his John Deere commercial with Colton McKivitz. You'll recognize that bluish gray house that was at the start of the commercial, and then you'll recognize the view that Brock Purdy and Colton McKivitz were driving toward at the end of the commercial. So I promised you guys I'd hit the spot. It's Bernal Heights here in San Francisco. And while we're talking about Brock Purdy, this continues my series of a look at the top 30 visits for the 49ers. And we're going to look at the three cornerbacks who we know have visited. So these rookies, the first one that I really want to talk about is Decamarion Richardson out of Mississippi State. He's one of the most physically impressive cornerbacks in this entire draft. 6'2", so he's got the size, but also, the guy runs a 4.3 40. I mean, this is top-end speed kind of player. The problem is that he hasn't delivered all too much production at the cornerback position yet. No interceptions in college, but if you just want pure physical traits, especially if you're looking at a taller cornerback, if you're the 49ers, Decamarion Richardson out of Mississippi State is somebody to look at. Another player with really plus physical traits is Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. He's a little bit shorter than Richardson, but the vertical jump and the broad jump, like a 42, 43-inch vertical, really good broad jump as well. 97th percentile out of cornerbacks on both of those. Andrew Phillips, another player with no college interceptions, but a lot of explosion and physical tools that the 49ers might be able to use at that cornerback position. And finally, Charles Smith-Wade out of Washington State. Now, this is a guy who's not as physically impressive. He's a little bit shorter than both Richardson and Andrew Phillips, about 5'11", but he has produced in college. 20 pass breakups for Charles Smith-Wade, 3 interceptions in college. So a little bit more of a polished contributor to cornerback, even though he obviously doesn't have the same physical prowess just by the tail of the tape. So, but the tail of the game tape has been good for Charles Smith-Wade. All three of these corners have visited the 49ers in the top 30 process. And yes, drafting a cornerback, I think, is close to necessary this offseason. You've got to continue adding at that position. Your top 4 veteran corners are only under contract for this 2024 season. That's Charvarius Ward, Diamaro Lenore, Rock Yassin, and Isaac Yiadom. All those guys only under contract through this 2024 season. So all the guys I listed, they're going to face off against Brock Purdy in training camp. And then the 3 prospects that I listed, we've got another cornerback to add to the 49ers top 30 list. It is Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. This is one of the fastest players in this NFL draft. 4.28 40, 1.50, 10-yard split. I mean, the guy is explosive as hell. His 20-yard split time was the fastest of all players in this NFL draft. 1.76. That is impressive. Now, the thing about Nate Wiggins, even though he's projected to be a 1st or 2nd round pick, is that he's a little slight of frame. It's in the 170s. Might be a little skinny. Obviously, the 49ers have had strength issues with somebody like Ambry Thomas. They've tried to bulk him up over the years. That's something they would have to do with Nate Wiggins as well. You're going to have to, in the NFL, especially at that catch point, there needs to be more muscle. So I think, although that is obviously a concern, the speed with somebody like Nate Wiggins is very, very tantalizing. I mean, 4.28 40, anything under sub 4.3, that is rare. So not a surprise that the 49ers have been interested in this cornerback out of Clemson. This is one of the highest graded players that they have hosted on a top 30 visit, the other one being Marshawn Nealon, the edge rusher out of Western Michigan. So there's a need for speed on the back end, and the 49ers are definitely interested in it. If they stay at number 31, if there's no trade back or maybe even a trade up, because we're talking about that whole Brandon Aiyuk situation, more on that in a little bit, by the way. But if they stay at number 31, addressing right tackle, or addressing cornerback, because John Lynch said it really clearly yesterday. Corner, there's a need there. It might not be immediate. You've got Lenore, you've got Yidam, you've got Rakiasin on top of Charvarius Ward, but all the guys I just listed, they're only under contract through 2024. So I think that you absolutely need to think about the season after this 2024 year. And that's why I've long said they might draft a cornerback surprisingly high. And I don't think it's a shock that they're looking at Nate Wiggins, the speedster, 4.28 speed out of Clemson. Here's my top sleeper prospect for the 49ers in this 2024 draft. It is Jamal Hill out of Oregon. Listen to this. He began his college career and played most of it at nickelback. He finished his college career at inside linebacker. We know that the 49ers have loved taking guys with DB backgrounds for their linebacker positions. That's why they've been so damn good in coverage, from Fred Warner, who played a glorified nickelback role in college, to somebody like Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, who was actually a safety in college, to Dre Greenlaw, who was the fastest player on Arkansas's defense, even though he was a linebacker. They love linebackers who can run. Jamal Hill can obviously run. He used to be a nickelback. Now he's an inside linebacker. I mean, you don't see this kind of positional conversion. I think adaptability has been really big for the 49ers on all fronts. Even Kalia Davis, who was a stack inside linebacker, who's now a defensive tackle. So the 49ers, that's how they tried to glean comparative advantages, I think, on both offense and defense. We talk so much about their positional adaptability on offense. Well, it's a big thing on defense as well. So Jamal Hill, he might not be drafted. This might be an undrafted free agent prospect, but the 49ers have had multiple points of contact with him. And according to one report, they even initially had a top 30 visit scheduled with him, although I'm not sure if that top 30 visit did actually happen. Either way, we know they're interested in Jamal Hill, and we know that he fits their profile, and there could be tremendous value here in either the 7th round or an undrafted free agency. So my sleeper of the draft for the 49ers is Jamal Hill, the former nickelback, or that turned into an inside linebacker for Oregon. I think that matches what the 49ers are looking for very, very closely. So keep an eye on that as this draft approaches. Just one more day until we get going.